beautiful legacy. Every line, every curve leaves a trace of who we were.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Tiago Pinto, and you are listening to A Beautiful Legacy. By the late 20th century, the supermarket shelf had achieved something close to visual saturation. Logotypes were refined, reduced, and controlled. Packaging spoke in hierarchies, rational, optimized, and consistent. But something was missing. The shelf had become efficient, but not intimate. Clear, but not warm. Trustworthy, yet strangely impersonal. And then, quietly, a different tone entered the aisle. Not louder, not more complex, but unmistakably human. In the late 1980s, through his work for Brooklyn Brewery, Milton Glaser introduced something that food and beverage branding had largely forgotten: craft as personality. Not craft as nostalgia, not craft as decoration, but craft as authorship. To lettering, color, and composition, Glaser reshaped how small producers could speak at scale, and in doing so, he helped define the visual language of the modern craft beverage movement. Milton Glaser did not arrive at packaging through retail logic. He arrived through culture. Born in New York in 1929 and educated at Cooper Union and later in Bologna, Glaser developed a design language shaped equally by modernism, illustration, history, and popular culture. He never belonged fully to any single school. Instead, he absorbed freely Renaissance ornament, psychedelic color, vernacular signage, hand lettering. From the Bob Dylan poster to New York Magazine, his work consistently resisted neutrality. It preferred warmth over distance and personality over system. This orientation mattered because by the 1980s, beverage branding, particularly beer, had become heavily standardized. Labels relied on heraldry, medals, shields, or austere typographic grids. Authority was communicated through tradition, often regardless of authenticity. Glaser recognized the opportunity immediately. If mass beer communicated through heritage codes, a small brewery could communicate through voice.
Every line, every curve leaves a trace of who we were.
In 1988, when Steve Hindy and Tom Potter founded Brooklyn Brewery, they needed more than packaging. They needed presence. The American beer market at the time was dominated by a handful of industrial brands. Shelf space was crowded, but visually monotonous. For a new brewery without scale, distinction had to come from recognition, not repetition. Glaser's solution was deceptively simple: a circular mark, a large, confident bee, surrounded by hand-drawn calligraphic letterforms spelling Brooklyn. It felt immediate, not corporate, not ironic, not nostalgic in a calculated sense. Instead, it conveyed ease, the sense that the brand already belonged where it stood. The typography was crucial. Rather than adopting rigid geometry, Glaser used letterforms with visible gestures. The strokes felt written rather than constructed. Imperfections were intentional. This was not a brand claiming heritage. It was a brand claiming authorship.
Beautiful legacy. Every line, every curve leaves leaves a trace of who we were.
What distinguished Glaser's approach was restraint. Where later craft beers would often multiply illustration, narrative, and novelty, Brooklyn Brewery remained composed. The system relied on repetition, the central mark, strong color fields, minimal variation. Warmth came not from complexity, but from tone. Green for the lager, black for the stout. Muted palettes across formats. The labels avoided visual noise. They trusted recognition. More importantly, they trusted the consumer. Rather than persuading through claims, stronger, richer, bolder, the design invited curiosity. It behaved less like advertising and more like a conversation. This was unusual for retail, at a moment when most packaging still competed through assertion. Glaser demonstrated that understatement could also command attention.
Beauty. Beautiful legacy. Every line, every curve leaves a trace of who we were.
Glaser understood something fundamental about authenticity. He knew that craft does not require performance. Many early attempts at artisanal branding relied heavily on borrowed symbols, woodcuts, faux vintage typography, distressed textures. These gestures often communicated insecurity rather than confidence. Glaser avoided this entirely. Brooklyn Brewery did not pretend to be 19th century. It did not simulate age, it simply spoke in a contemporary voice with human inflection. This distinction proved decisive because authenticity, once aestheticized too heavily, collapses into style. Glaser preserved its credibility by refusing spectacle. In doing so, he created a model that countless brands would later imitate, often without understanding why it worked.
Beautiful legacy. Every line, every curve leaves a trace of who we were.
As Brooklyn Brewery expanded beyond New York City, the system held. This was its real test. Many small producers struggled with growth because their identities are too fragile to scale. They depend on narrative or on novelty rather than structure. Glaser's solution was architectural. The circular mark functioned across bottles, tap handles, signage, merchandise, and environments. It adapted easily to different formats without losing coherence. The visual language was flexible but anchored. Importantly, expansion did not dilute personality. Even as production increased and distribution widened, the brand retained its tone: informal, approachable, quietly, and confident. This was rare, and it demonstrated something important to the industry. Craft could scale without surrendering its voice.
Beautiful legacy. Every line, every curve leaves a trace of who we were.
By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the craft beer movement had accelerated globally. New breweries emerged across the United States and Europe. Each required visual distinction. Many looked, directly or indirectly, to Glaser's precedent. His influence appeared in three lasting shifts. First, the acceptance of illustration and hand lettering within serious beverage branding. What had once been considered informal became credible. Second, the repositioning of personality as strategic. Brands no longer needed to mimic corporate neutrality to gain trust. Third, the reframing of packaging as cultural signal rather than purely a commercial tool. These shifts extended beyond beer. Wine labels adopted more expressive typography. Soft drink startups embraced warmth over polish. Even larger corporations began experimenting with more conversational tones. The aisle changed gradually and then all at once.
Beautiful legacy. Every line, every curve leaves a trace of who we were.
The world we inherited from Milton Glaser. Today, craft beverages occupy substantial shelf space across Europe and beyond. But more importantly, their visual language feels normal. Hand lettering no longer signals marginality. Illustration no longer suggests amateurism. Warmth no longer implies lack of seriousness. We take for granted that brands can speak conversationally, that packaging can express mood, humor, and locality without losing credibility. This expectation did not emerge spontaneously. It was constructed. Glaser showed that personality could operate as infrastructure, that informality, when disciplined, becomes durable. He also reminded the industry that consumers respond not only to clarity and hierarchy, but to tone, the subtle cues that signal whether a brand understands the world it inhabits. In an era of increasing automation and algorithmic design, this lesson feels particularly relevant because warmth remains difficult to standardize. Milton Glaser did not revolutionize the shelf through disruption. He did something more enduring. He softened it. At a time when beverage branding leaned toward uniformity, he introduced voice, calm, recognizable, and human. He showed that craft was not a surface treatment, but a way of thinking about communication. Through Brooklyn Brewery, he demonstrated that personality need not to compete with structure, that warmth could exist with discipline, that design could be both systematic and generous. The result was not simply a success label, it was a shift in tone across an entire category. Because once brands learn to speak as people rather than institutions, the aisle changes permanently. And that, truly, is a beautiful legacy.
Beautiful legacy. Every line, every curve leaves a trace of who we were.
You've been listening to A Beautiful Legacy. This month, we explore the people and brands who transformed how the world eats, from systems of preservation to systems of experience, from efficiency to emotion, from anonymity to authorship. In the coming episodes, we will continue to look into the figures who shaped not just what we buy, but how we perceive value, quality, and care into everyday retail environments. If you enjoyed the episode, follow the show and join me again every Tuesday and Thursday. Until then, keep noticing the beauty people leave behind.
Beautiful legacy. Every line, every curve leaves a trace of who we were. In the shape of a chair, in the light on a wall, someone's dream still stands tall. But